Hello and welcome to ATARC's webinar series. Today we will hear from cybersecurity experts as they discuss how creating a strong cyber hygiene routine can help to ensure that your systems and devices are protected from threats. My name is Kirsten Patton and I'm the program manager here at ATARC, and I'll also be moderating today's webinar. ATARC stands for the Advanced Technology Academic Research Center, and we are a nonprofit organization that provides collaborative forums between government, industry, and academia in order to accelerate technology modernization initiatives. We also provide ongoing opportunities for cross-agency collaboration through on-site interaction, learning, and market research. I would like to thank you all at home, our attendees, for joining us today. And also, I would like to give a special thanks to the Tenable team for helping ATARC put this webinar together. Before we begin, I just want to encourage the audience to please interact with us as much as you would like and submit questions of your own in the Q&A section of this platform. Also, if you would like to receive your CPE credits for attending today's event, please ensure that you answer all the poll questions as they pop up throughout the discussion. So now let's meet our panel of experts. If our panelists could please come on camera, we'll go around and do some introductions. So I'll have you guys introduce yourself, share us who you are, what agency you're with, and what your role is there, as well as anything else up top you'd like to share. So let's start with Daniel, please.
Thanks, Kirsten. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Daniel Bardenstein. I lead technology strategy for the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, aka CISA, specifically the Cybersecurity division within CISA. Relatively new to government. My background is in the private sector, building cybersecurity products and national security analytics products in various tech companies in vendorland. And have since over the last couple of years moved over to government to see how we can make government a little bit better when it comes to all things security and technology. And very happy to be here.
Thanks, Daniel. And moving right on over to Sandra.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sandra Pablo, and I am the Chief IT Security Officer at the National Archives and Record Administration. And just a little quick tidbit about NARA. Everybody knows NARA for the Declaration of Independence, the Bill of Rights and all, but we do a bit more than that. Now, NARA is basically the nation's record keeper. So we have records, millions of records, cubic feet of records on ordinary citizens, military and civilian personnel, and many other. And we also run the Presidential Libraries and Museum, and also the Federal Register. So we do a lot, and our goal is to make sure that the nation has access to the records. And for that, we need a modernized and robust security architecture to protect those electronic records. So Zero Trust, when it came out, was really something that we feel is challenging, but we are quick to embrace. So looking forward to sharing some of my insight with you guys today.
That's great. Thank you, Sandra. We're happy to have you here. And let's hear from John next, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm John Sims. I work for the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency with Daniel. I am one of the security architects for the Trusted Internet Connections program. I've co-led the development of the CISA Zero Trust maturity model, and also co-led the development of the Cloud Security Technical Reference Architecture to support Executive Order 14028. Glad to be here, and thanks for joining us today.
Excellent, thank you. And then over to Glenn.
Hey, I'm Glenn Pembley, Chief Technology Officer at Tenable. Been in security for over 20 years now. Throughout that time, focused on not only security research, but also building products and technology to help folks solve the problem of securing their environment.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Glenn. All right, now that we've heard from our panelists, let's go ahead and jump into the first question that we have. So with the recent Log4 vulnerability underscores that bad actors will continue to find new opportunities to penetrate networks. My question is, How does the implementation of a zero trust strategy enable agencies to better respond to these kinds of threats? We don't necessarily have to go into any particular order, but whoever would like to kick us off with that first question, and I can repeat it as well if you'd like, go ahead and come off mute and start us off. All right, Glenn was first. Glenn, over to you.
I think, with Log4j and any other sort of vulnerability or misconfiguration or any sort of flaw in your environment that can lead to some sort of exploit, the most important thing you can do is just get visibility into what's out there. So when you're trying to implement a zero trust, strategy within your environment, you have to know what is within your realm of responsibility in order to put together your plan and your strategy and how you're going to try to accomplish zero trust. And with Log4j in particular, one of the very interesting things about that vulnerability is just how easily it is to exploit that vulnerability and the number of different attack vectors that were possible. Like across our customer base, we've seen been able to detect Log4j on so many odd different devices over different types of protocols, whether it's like POP3, IMAP, SMTP, things that you wouldn't really expect and where people mostly look. So with Log4j, it's everywhere and it's so easily accessible. So having an idea of what's in your environment so that you can apply would have helped at least contain some of these things if you knew what was out there.
Thank you, Glenn. Would any of our government panelists? Sandra, go ahead.
Sure. Just with what Glenn says, Log4j was embedded in so many. I mean, it was part of a software library that was basically used worldwide. So at one point, it was estimated to be present in over 100 million instances globally. So, so when you look at that type of vulnerability in the code, that would allow an attacker to execute code remotely on any targeted computer, you can understand why a zero trust architecture would really help counter something like this. So when you look at zero trust, one of the foundational tenet of zero trust is that no actor, no system, no network, whether you're operating outside or inside the security perimeter, is trusted, right? So everything must be verified. Whenever you're trying to establish access, it has to be verified and allowed. So when you look at zero trust and one of its approach is the micro segmentation and network-based segmentation that actually meaningfully will isolate that environment, so that if something like Log4j, one of those something in the network was compromised, with the micro segmentation, it would not really block it from moving laterally within the organization. So you can compromise this segment, but you cannot easily traverse and compromise any other component of this organization. So zero trust is like if you're not implicitly granted access to an asset, you will not get access. So every single asset has its own trust, as its own authorization for each user or anything else trying to access it.
Go ahead, John.
I'm going to go next. So I think Sandra brought up some excellent points. Zero Trust provides the ability to, contain the blast radius, if you will, for vulnerabilities, reduce the attack surface, and clearly one of the key elements is, microsegmentation. As we look at where agencies are today, a lot of agencies still have significant, flat networks that, moving laterally is relatively simple to do. And some of the more basic elements of network segmentation in particular will help agencies reduce the footprint of a lot of these applications. And as Sandra and Glenn indicated, Log4j is very pervasive on a lot of the application stacks and services in the federal enterprise. And so I see that the visibility and the some of the features within Zero Trust that really help you get an understanding of what's in those environments, how to properly secure them, with some defense in depth strategies, applying Zero Trust principles, really helps you get a better handle on visibility. But I want to underscore the importance of knowing, how much you have in terms of like the types of Log4js and the other software components out there that really need to be understood in terms of like where they are in your environment in relation to high value assets in a lot of cases, so that you can apply sound patching policy and procedures against your environment in a timely manner to reduce the impact over the course of time. Daniel, over to you.
Thanks, John. Going last, there's much been said, so I won't belabor the point too much. But I'd say lastly, when I think about, software inherently has vulnerabilities. We'll never get past that. When we think about, the value that Zero Trust provides, or the vision that we hope it provides, it's really about being able to have better control over who can access what. And so, credentials are still at the heart of most successful breaches. And so John kind of hit on it, so I'll just kind of stomp the grounds again there around when implemented correctly, even if someone is able to successfully phish a user, for example, if Zero Trust can be implemented properly and architected properly, which is not an easy thing in and of itself, you're really able to contain what could be one user's credentials being compromised to then being able for that adversary to move laterally, escalate their privileges, and then actually be able to carry out a much larger and more impactful attack on the enterprise. So, Zero Trust, I think there's a lot of misinformation about it, unfortunately, or what folks think it is. It's not going to, make vulnerabilities go away. It's not going to stop all the hackers at the door, the malicious hackers at the door, but it makes it a lot safer for if something were to happen in the first place, very much limiting the scope of the potential damage.
Great, thank you. We have one audience question come in asking, how do you view API security relative to Zero Trust? And I think it might have came through when Sandra was speaking. So, but anyone, if you'd like to answer that.
I'll take a shot at it. So, a lot of the work that we've done over the last 9 months, in particular around Zero Trust, supporting the executive order, we've looked at, the nature of how we're using cloud today. Now we're almost 2 years into the pandemic, and a lot of agencies, were thrust into the cloud, I think, well ahead of when they had actually planned in a lot of cases. And so, as those virtual environments were being established, we're all using Teams, Zoom, and what have you. I think that APIs are a very critical element as you look at the relationship between services and the environments and the applications that we're using and how they're communicating across the cloud environments. And so, if you look at Gartner, they'll tell you that calendar year 22 is going to be the year of API being the attack vector of choice. And so, looking at how you can apply practical Zero Trust principles to API connections through firewalls and gateways, but also authentication is going to play a very pivotal role. And I think reducing the footprint of that being like a favorable attack surface.
Yeah, can I add something really quick? Oh, go ahead, Sandra. I was just gonna say, when I look at API security, I've done a lot of research into the space. There's really kind of two aspects, and actually both aspects kind of line up with Zero Trust. So from an API perspective, one of the first things you need to do is get, understand what APIs you have available in the applications that you're writing, right? So you would think that it's, you have your developers, they're creating APIs, these endpoints are created, you know where they exist. In reality, that's not really the case. So that's one aspect. The other part of API security that aligns with a good zero trust mindset is those endpoints that are getting created are essentially just front doors to the application that they're fronting. So syntactically, how they are written, if it's poorly written, if you're not making sure that that is written in a way in the most secure manner possible, it's opening the door for folks to take advantage of. And John kind of mentioned it, the authentication piece of it. Those endpoints you need, if you're doing things correctly on critical systems, there's some form of authentication that's happening, whether it's an API key or whatever. So really tightening that down, because that's how you're giving external people access to data within a system. So the same things, the same principles apply, whether it's just a normal interaction with an application or you're doing it programmatically through an API endpoint, but the principles still apply the same.
Absolutely, Glenn. When you look at what an API is, as you said, it gives you access to, it's an interface between a user, whatever it is, between an application, and provides information. So you can understand how it would be really appealing for a hacker to actually attack an API. So as you said, Glenn, I totally agree with what both everyone has said here. So it's still the zero trust principle would definitely apply to an API, as it would protect that particular aspect of your application. Be part of the application, you protect it, nothing is trusted. And also talking about how that information flows from the web application to that user, whomever requests that information. You also have to protect this data as it's coming from the application to its destination, and with TLS or whatever security. So which is part of zero trust also. Everything traversing your network has to be encrypted, and whether it's at rest or in transit, has to be encrypted. So the same principle has to apply to the API as well.
Thank you. And Daniel, did you want to vocalize your response?
Yeah, I can also, if it's okay, Kirsten, there are a couple other related questions in the chat that I'm happy to, I think that one's already been well trodden. So just calling out Tim's question around what DHS is doing with the CDM program. So for those who aren't familiar, CDM and continuous diagnostics and mitigation, one of the largest programs that CISA owns within DHS. Again, I'm assuming most people know about that, but just in case. So this is something specifically that John and my team are working on. Not only just revamping the CDM program and kind of evolving it, but also looking at actually deploying zero trust not just zero trust capabilities, but being able to enrich CISA's ability to get good visibility to help support protecting departments and agencies in such a way that also supports the maturity and implementation of zero trust within the departments and agencies. So there's a lot of work going on there, and John at the helm, there's a lot of really important zero trust work, not just in the strategies and the playbooks and the maturity models, but also in the practical development and implementation going on within CISA and DHS. And then real quick to William's question here. The short answer is yes, application allow listing is, I think many would consider a best practice. Being relatively new to CISA, I can't tell you exactly in which specific government guidances it may or may not appear, or does not appear, but it's definitely something that many of us within government do consider to be a best practice, and whether or not you include it in your definition of zero trust or not, sort of orthogonal to the fact that it is a very good practice to use, and something that can very much support what your organization's zero trust implementation may look like.
Thank you, Daniel. And John, did you want to comment as well about the CDM programming?
Yeah, so one of the things that some folks may not know, I was one of the original program managers for CDM back in 2013 through 2016. And when we first started CDM, it was about ongoing authorization, censoring the government data centers to perform continuous monitoring. And as as the program evolved over time, and as we started looking at cloud and zero trust, especially in the last year or so, there's been a recognition that we've got to look at how CDM capabilities can actually support the federal zero trust strategy and the application of zero trust within the federal environments. And so, we released the zero trust maturity model, not as a deliverable for the executive order, but rather to start to shape what we could convey to agencies in terms of like how you can look at CDM to support asset management, and some other areas within the zero trust pillars. We released the draft zero trust maturity model very quickly over the summer, released it for public comment, and we're going to come out with a revision 2 sometime this year to really dig into some more details with regard to how zero trust aligns with our CISA programs and services. So we've done a lot of work with TIC so far, but CDM is another area that I think could benefit from additional explanation and connectivity to the data or the zero trust pillars in the federal strategy.
Excellent. Thank you, John. So I want to hone in on the other audience question for a moment too. This person sent in, with current world events escalating and higher priority security vigilance shielding up, is the federal government considering deny by default capabilities such as application whitelisting? So would any of our other panelists like to respond to that?
I think Daniel did.
Okay. Would any of our other panelists also like to respond to that?
I'll take a shot at it. So, application whitelisting is a very challenging area of cybersecurity to apply to enterprise environments. And so we looked at it as one of the initial set of capabilities for CDM back in 2013, 2014. And looking at the level of effort that it was going to take in terms of inventorying all of the applications, the governance associated with it, and the operations, we did postpone that as a capability because it seemed like it was a high degree of effort that if not implemented properly, may not have yielded the results that we were looking for. But the Australians did a lot of work, over the last 10 or so years with application whitelisting that has proven to be very successful in terms of thwarting cyber attacks. But it is something that I think we've got to continue to look at in terms of applying that to the federal enterprise.
All right, so we're going to take a pause from questions real quick, and we're going to pop up our first poll. If we could please get that up on the screen. Does your organization have adequate visibility into attack vectors and surfaces that adversaries may use to access your critical environment? Please go ahead and respond to that. Remember, these are for CPE credits, so if you want your CPE credit, make sure you answer the poll. Moving on to our next question. CISA leadership has espoused that one of the key strategies that agencies can take in order to mitigate cyber risk is to implement good cyber hygiene. So the question is, what are your recommendations for improving an agency's overall cyber hygiene?
Happy to take a first stab here. So seeing the quick results from the poll, promising, but I guarantee that almost every agency, I've yet to see an agency, federal or otherwise, that has as good a picture of the visibility of their assets or threats than they think. So just a quick personal story on that. So I was one of the cybersecurity leads for Operation Warp Speed, which is the US government's effort to research and deploy COVID-19 vaccines. And when we were trying to work with many government agencies and private sector industries, we looked at, this was the time when there were a lot of, even though phishing is traditionally a very common vector, a lot of, especially nation state adversaries are moving more towards exploiting vulnerabilities in public facing infrastructure, right? And 2020, 2021 had a lot of, 0 days and just pretty nasty bugs. And with every agency we looked at, we deployed some, free or open source attack surface monitoring tools, and we're able to find wide open vulnerabilities, very easily exploitable assets on pretty much every system or enterprise that we looked at. So when we talk about hygiene, there's a lot, and I have to obviously plug CISA.gov website. There's many lists. There are many offerings in terms of what CISA cannot provide. But it all starts with the basics that I'm sure many of the folks on the call are familiar with. Asset management, you have to know what you have first, and just double tapping there, because we all know that. I think a lot of organizations aren't necessarily as familiar with what they have that's on the public internet. So this is where we're using, and when I say attack surface monitoring, it doesn't have to be like a fancy commercial tool in the Gartner quadrant that has that. There are many good open source or free tools that can help you identify all of your assets that are on the public internet. As an incredibly useful exercise. And then from there, doing good hygiene in terms of vulnerability management. So assessing when there's a new vulnerability that may come out, not necessarily just going off of the CVSS score, but understanding what is that vulnerability's threat to your organization, how prevalent is it, does it affect you, and really how quickly can you answer the question, if there's a new Exchange vulnerability, how quickly can your organization answer the question, where are all of our Exchange servers, and which of them are vulnerable to this particular vulnerability? The speed with which you can answer those questions are incredibly important, and I'll just focus my cyber hygiene answer when it comes to public-facing infrastructure and vulnerability management. There's a lot of other stuff, but I will stop there to leave plenty of room for the rest of the panelists to jump in.
Right, Daniel, you said something here that kind of did strike fear into my heart. It's like, you don't really know as much of your environment as you think you do. You are absolutely correct. And you know why I say that? What I don't know is gonna hurt me. Sometimes you say what you don't know is not gonna, yes, what you don't know in security, what you don't know is gonna hurt you. And with me, I don't have to add what Daniel said. There's other stuff. The way I think is that what hygiene is to actually reduce your threat landscape by employing measures that are going to limit hackers' opportunity to penetrate those defenses. What does that mean? Can mean a lot. So I'm going to concentrate this patch management, because this is one of the biggest threat vectors in your enterprise. Unpatched endpoints, patch management is very important. And another thing that I do is like somebody mentioned zero threat. So basically, the kind of signature-based assessment that you used to do before, it doesn't really work as well. So what we do at NARA is that we've invested a lot of money into anomalous activities detection. So and also what we've done, we are a very good partner of CISA. So we've leveraged a lot of CISA's capabilities to augment what we do. And CISA does provide threat intelligence that we use also in our continuous monitoring. And we've been a part of the DHS CDM program from the onset, and we've reaped a lot of benefits from this partnership. And we recently, and Daniel, you mentioned knowing what you have, having visibility. So we've recently implemented the CDM agency dashboard, and that provides additional visibility into what we have in the environment. And we also do we also part of the CISA's cyber hygiene initiative. So that really scans our external fence-facing components and gives us a report on where they see any vulnerabilities that we might not be able to see. And also in Zero Trust, if you look at the OMB memo, there's what they call the VDP program. So we also did create, we cannot, just like CISA like CISA, we cannot offer bounties, right? We don't have that kind of funds. We can't offer money. But if an external person was to detect something in one of our websites, they can report it to us, and we'll attend to that. So this is what I wanted to add in terms of hygiene.
Thank you, Sandra. John or Glenn, would you like to comment before we move on?
I'll go. So, you know, Sandra and Dan were spot on. I'm not going to repeat that. You have to understand what assets you have out there. You need to continually assess to know how they're configured, vulnerabilities, all that sort of stuff. I think in regard, like, there's one piece of hygiene, especially in regards to trying to ensure zero trust, that I don't hear too many people talking about. And it's being able to continually audit the identity and access, or the access and authorization control plane. So you have lots of different applications that have different user models, different permissions. And if your goal as a part of zero trust is to provide least privileged access, you can do an audit one day, and in theory, it's not reality, but you could have a perfect sort of setup where everybody has magnificent, yeah, awesome least privileges for that particular application. And 5 minutes later, somebody could do something that immediately blows everything up. So as a part of your hygiene, you have to continually audit these systems that are providing access to the users to these different applications, if your goal is to try to provide continually least privileged access. And that's just something I don't think many people kind of recognize as a part of it. They buy they'll buy tools, they'll spend a ton of money to do an audit. I'm like, how's my Active Directory configured? Because, you know, everybody authenticates to that. They spend a whole bunch of money, red team kills them. They make a few changes and they're like, all right, I'll see you next year. And obviously that is not very good hygiene. So figuring out different ways to continually audit that control plane in order to continue that assurance, I think, is a critical aspect of hygiene in regards to not only zero trust, but just, you know, protecting yourself in general.
Thanks, Glenn. And John, did you have anything you'd like to add before we move on?
Yeah, the only thing, I mean, you know, I think everyone covered a lot of the really important points, but you know, one thing that stands out to me as we talk about, you know, cyber hygiene, we talk about the large federal enterprise, and you know, I think we've got to start looking at how prioritization plays a role in how we apply cybersecurity practices and attention. And you know, when we look at you know, the high value asset program is you know, identifying your crown jewels for an agency. You know, we need to have a level of resiliency with that set of systems in each federal agency, because believe it or not, you know, most of them are interconnected to other federal agencies. So I think if we look at, you know, the things that were discussed already by the other panelists, and taking it, you know, a step further and looking at, you know, prospect of what mature zero trust implementations look like, I think, you know, resiliency has to play a significant role in that, so that it's not necessarily one size fits all, but we can properly secure the systems and data that really matter.
Great, thank you all for your responses. We're going to take another quick pause to put up poll number 2, please. That should be on the screen. Give me a second. There you go. How important is it to have a continuous, near real-time view into your agency's cloud vulnerabilities? So, audience, please go ahead and respond to that. And moving along to our next question. An essential component of a zero trust strategy is gaining visibility across the threat landscape. What should agencies do to assure that they have identified key vulnerabilities that put their IT/OT infrastructure at risk? You can just come off mute whenever you're ready to respond to that answer, to that question.
I'm gonna take a stab at it, obviously. So every agency is different. So based on the business's risk appetite, you know, cyber defense are gonna vary to protect their most valuable asset. So, you know, we know cyber professionals know that there's no way that we can reduce vulnerabilities and risk to zero. And so we can definitely risk rank our assets and apply the security resources adequately to protect the most valuable assets, right? So awareness of the threat landscape is very important. So you have to look for the right indicators of compromise and you have to understand that the risks to the enterprise, the risk, understanding risk of to the enterprise is about having what you talked about on the poll, like a near real-time intelligence into the security posture of your resources. And also the actions being taken by those accessing those resources. So you have to be able to monitor what your users are doing and to the data, not only to the data, where your data is and what you're doing in accessing the data. So this is I think of that.
Great, thank you.
I'll go next. You know, I think over the last few years, we've seen more people start being familiar with the fact that we need to start actually making a real effort to securing these OT devices. I think for a long time, people just assumed like, oh, they're on a completely, you know, segregated network. We don't have to touch them, blah, blah, blah. That's not really true in reality. All the big OT attacks that have happened over the last year are actually, they're not being, those OT devices aren't the ones that are getting attacked directly. It's actually IT devices that get attacked. And then through Active Directory trust into the OT environment. I mean, there's a lot of different attacks. But what happens is these IT devices are exploited. That lateral movement's happening because lack of zero trust and just different ways of trying to limit the impact like we talked about earlier. And then once they get into the OT environment, I think one thing people think is that our OT specific devices, like, you know, ICS devices and just things that aren't your traditional IT sort of stuff, I think they look at it like all those things have vulnerabilities, exactly like a laptop and server. And that's not necessarily true. You know, they do in some cases, but even if they do, a lot of these sort of devices don't have any authentication at all. So people just can connect to it. As soon as you're in that environment, you can just connect to these devices and just make code changes, do whatever you want, change the heat up, blow up a centrifuge. Like there's really anything that you want to do once you just get into the environment to begin with. So, you know, identifying the fact that this IT OT convergence is a real thing, and then getting visibility into how these OT devices are configured and check and continue to validate the behavioral sort of, you know, behavior of these sort of devices is the kind of way to do it, because nobody is going to exploit an ICS machine when they can just connect to it and do what they want anyway. So I think people's mindsets need to shift a little bit when it comes to these very specific, specialized sort of devices.
All right, thanks, Glenn. Daniel, go ahead.
Sure. I will be brief here. I think things we answered in the previous question also apply here. Asset management, harder to do in OT. Vulnerabilities, like Glenn mentioned, good to understand, but again, almost always it's coming through the IT system. So it really comes back to, you know, as, and Glenn hit the IT-OT convergence bit right on the head, you know, agencies should be monitoring, you know, well, first of all, monitoring is a big part, right? So monitoring traffic between, hopefully there is some sort of logical segmentation between IT and OT networks, but, you know, monitoring traffic between OT infrastructure, between whatever that central segmented point is between IT and OT, assuming that exists, and being able to detect good, meaningful insights from that monitoring. You know, because without that, you know, even if you protect your OT really strongly, if your IT is trivially easy to exploit and it's easy to pivot over into the OT environment, it's game over as well. And this is something that CISA is taking a hard look at as well in terms of helping bolster and develop some of our own OT monitoring capabilities to help partners get better visibility onto their OT networks, which is something, again, that's a lot harder to do. Again, we talk about the vulnerability assessment bits as well. Most folks probably know we don't want to take active scanning anywhere near our OT and ICS devices, but there's some new technologies coming out or other approaches that still are out there and developing that can help agencies get better visibility into their OT networks and the normal set of communications between OT systems. So it's really just those very similar concepts that we would apply in IT, but everything's just a little bit harder. But to Glenn's point, IT is still the easiest way in, which is how the adversary will always approach things.
Real quick follow-up on that too. Like, we have an OT device, like a solution and all that, and gotten over the last few years, I've gotten a lot more educated on the thing. And it's important, I think, for everybody to remember, it's not just the IT devices in your normal everyday network. Like, a lot of these engineering workstations that manage these devices, they're still running Windows NT, Windows XP, like all of these systems, because that software was written specifically to manage these devices, and it works. And there's no reason to change it because the lights are still on. So you can't patch a lot of these things. There are no patches. So really it comes down to, like Dan said, continually monitoring, understanding the behavior, not only the ICS systems, but the activity and the behavior that's happening within those IT systems within your OT environment.
Great, thank you. Any other comments here before we move on to the next question?
Yeah, the only thing I'll add to what everyone else has said is, we always talk about, real time, monitoring and what have you, and it really, it's got to be cyber relevant based on what you're trying to protect and monitor.
Thanks, John. All right, let's see what our audience question was. Is or how is CISA going to measure agency progress towards zero trust across the federal enterprise? Where will there be a zero trust dashboard to show agency progress, such as the FATARA scores?
Let me go ahead and jump in on that one. So that's to be determined. We're a month into the release of the M2209, the Federal Zero Trust Strategy. There have been several discussions with the team over at OMB about measures and metrics in terms of like how we're going to assess progress. If you look at M2209, there's those key areas that OMB and the Federal CIO and CISO's office is looking to get traction on, about segmentation, phishing resistant MFA data, et cetera. And so, when we look at how long it's going to take to do those types of things, they're not laying down like, by 2024, you must have X percentage of your environment compliant with, XYZ, because they know it's going to be challenging. They know there's going to have to be realignment of budget. But I suspect that, based on what I'm hearing, is that they're going to be looking for demonstrable progress in those key areas, and looking at the plans that the agencies are submitting, here within the next couple of weeks. They're going to use those to continue the dialogue with the agencies, not just from the federal CIO's office, but also the resource side of OMB, where your budget examiners and resource officers and desk officers are engaging with the agencies, because it's about bringing together the entire support mechanism that the agencies rely on, to include CISA, to help support this initiative, because it's a long-term, there's a 3, 5, 10, 7 year activity, and it's not something that's going to happen overnight, and they're just going to be looking for some level of progress.
Thanks, John. And Daniel, did you want to respond as well?
I don't think I'll have anything more meaningful to say beyond John. This is his, he breathes this every day, so.
Okay, great. And for folks who have audience questions, please send them in the next 5 minutes since we're coming to the end of our panel discussion time. But with that, we'll turn it over to our next question I have prepared. So identity management and visibility into user profiles and privileges is critical to cyber defense. The question is, how can tools such as Active Directory security help disrupt attack paths and prevent lateral movement?
I'll go ahead and take a first crack at this. So let's look at SolarWinds for a minute. You know, the way in which SolarWinds was successful in terms of the attack was leveraging the federated identity management from Active Directory on-prem into cloud environments. So I think that one of the biggest things that at least my takeaway from this is that, you know, when we look at Active Directory as a you know, not only as directory service, but also a policy enforcement, policy decision capability, we've got to look at how we're engineering and architecting federated identity into multiple environments and making sure that there's a clear understanding as to how it's structured, how it's organized, and how it's going to be used. And the only thing I'll add to this is that, you know, we've definitely got to make sure that, you know, multi-factor authentication, you know, is a major component of this, and also that, you know, for you know, we've talked about visibility and zero trust, but really making sure that agencies have a very clear understanding about how identity is used within their environments, and making sure that they have the ability to log and get telemetry off of those systems through Active Directory and other sources to make sure that, you know, they understand how the system is being used under normal conditions and what it looks like when it's abnormal to take action.
Thank you, John. Would any of our other panelists like to respond to that question?
I mean, I kind of touched on it earlier, actually, like, you know, John's pretty spot on with everything, but it's, you know, when it comes to identity and access, everybody has Active Directory. It's been around for 20 years and it's been misconfigured for 20 years. It's just such a dumpster fire. And that's, I mean, it's the least common denominator that every single attacker goes after as soon as they, you know, get that first, be successful with that initial sort of attack vector. So of course you need to continually, you know, in my opinion, audit to figure out, reduce that the opportunity for privilege escalation or the lateral movement within an AD environment. But it's not just AD as well. Like if you think about a lot of different organizations within the government, think of all of the GOTS software, like these custom applications that were built just for that organization, and the identity and access associated with that, with any other applications, whether they're SaaS applications. Just think of all of the different things that you have to log into all the time. And people are like, oh, I use Okta, so I just have single sign-on. That has absolutely nothing to do with the privileges that these applications that you're using from a single sign-on perspective are giving you. So you have to just continually ensure that what people have access to is not more than they need, and you're limiting the possible impact. You need to do it continuously.
Thanks, Glenn. And Daniel, maybe you already saw this, but someone was asking if you could restate the name of the resource.
Yeah, I was trying to, I was intentionally not listing any specific resources, but I'm happy to, I'll answer the question by typing, but just briefly, there are many good free and open source tools out there that can provide that kind of level of visibility. There are many commercial tools out there, but if you have nothing, just getting started on the free and open source ones is a great place to start before you figure out what requirements you need on the commercial side. So I'll try to just jot down a couple free open source ones so I don't get, you know, any ethics issues going here, but I can do that in the chat.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you. All right. So again, to our audience, if you have any final questions, please send them in now. Otherwise, we'll probably run out of time to get them answered, but we can also do it through email if that's necessary. So let's go ahead and post our third and final poll question. How frequently does your IT organization scan network assets for vulnerabilities? So please go ahead and respond to that. Does any of the panelists would like to respond to that? Is that something that you believe is a certain number of times that should be routine for certain agencies? Maybe people online aren't really sure.
So I can do a quick response. So I would say we do regular scanning more frequently in a week, and especially when it comes to some vulnerabilities like log4j and all of those, we do it daily, for certain segments. So it's difficult to be able to scan an entire enterprise every day. I mean, you can. So basically, you can scan. What we do is that we scan segments of the network at a time to get visibility into the entire enterprise after maybe a month or whatever it is. But when it comes to certain vulnerabilities, we use our tools. And I don't want to name names, but thank you, Glenn. We love that tool. We use our tool to actually scan for specific vulnerabilities in the environment to make sure that we can detect it, we can see it. If so we have visibility into the network for specific vulnerabilities, but we do that very often.
Yeah, thank you for responding to that, Sandra. Daniel?
Yeah, so real quick. So I think we've already hit the point that more frequent is usually better, up to a point. Obviously, you don't need to scan every minute, but generally speaking, continuous is better than, especially in government. I used to work in DoD, quarterly, monthly, yearly. Not going to find you the results you need. Keep in mind, again, depending on your threat model, not everyone is always worried about nation states or more sophisticated adversaries, but there's been plenty of documented cases where adversaries can, given a new vulnerability, especially again one facing the public internet, that they can start mobilizing on the order of days, right? So if you're checking every month, by the time you get around to check it, you're probably already owned. The other thing I'll foot stomp real quick, and then I saw John was going to add in here, so I'm going to make a slight pivot onto this point as well. Is I think, especially as government, this is a weakness in our current approach to accreditation of systems, where we, to ensure that a system is okay to be, to authorize and credit and put on the network, we do like a one-time scan and we say, okay, it's okay. We fixed all the vulnerabilities. Now we can put it out. And it doesn't necessarily, during development, that's also the case. And so especially, I don't know all the folks who are on the call and kind of what degree folks are involved with actual software development, but really need to think kind of end-to-end life cycle of products, not just things that we procure or buy, but also anything that we might build. So actually building into continuous vulnerability scanning into CI/CD or continuous integration, continuous development pipelines for those of us who are also doing software development in our organizations. And again, this might seem to some like a burden, but with the right tooling and the right automation, of which there is plenty, both again open source and commercially, proper vulnerability management systems can be pretty automated. Just automatically scan regularly, automated triage, automated contextual enrichment, and then brought in front of a human in the loop for more rigorous analysis or decision making that takes away a lot of the heavy lifting that many vulnerability management teams suffer. So I'd also encourage folks to look to how to, it is possible to do this very quickly and very effectively with the right tooling in place. So I would encourage folks to look that way, but I will pass over to John for the rest.
Thanks, Daniel. I think Daniel gets the gold star for this one because, the whole premise of CI/CD and what it's going to do to help us move away from the how often should we scan and, that whole conversation. It made sense in 2010, it made sense in 2013, but today, I think when you start looking at cloud and how we need to use cloud in a modern context, that we've got to rely on DevSecOps. We've got to rely on CI/CD and immutable configurations. And so, from my perspective as a former CDM program manager, we had you scan every device on the network, every day, right? And, or within 72 hours, report progress, from the scan results within 8 hours. What we found was that was to Sandra's point, that was unachievable. And it was a goal that was not reachable by a lot of agencies. And so there's a level of frustration with that. But when we also talk about scanning, we also only are talking about the endpoint and the server, the workstation. And what we need to do is start thinking about how do we start doing automated checks on the software stack, the application stack, and looking a little bit beyond the workstation and server for the vulnerabilities and configurations, because let's face it, the attack surface is a large part is going to be that application exposure on the internet that's creating issues for us. So that's the only thing I'll add, but I totally agree with what Daniel said.
What about relying too much on automation? Is that a risk?
100%. When I was back in the private sector, I built one of these automation tools and launched it, and we had one customer that built a whole end-to-end automated playbook. And two stories I'm confusing, but still one. But essentially, yes, you don't always want to jump from zero to automation. In this particular case, there's a customer that built an automated playbook that, when automatically taking a remediative action like blocking an IP address, this was less vulnerability related, but threat related, accidentally blocked an internal IP address and shut off a decent chunk of its network. So it is possible. I've seen it done personally, but agencies should think of the crawl, walk, run approach when it comes to automation, starting with a little bit, especially the parts that are more defined and don't need as much human interaction to make sure humans are in the loop. And then as the organization matures its automation and gets more comfortable, can look to add more and more automation. And we've even gotten to the point, again, these tools exist where all this automation is done, all the analysis is brought together, and a user can get a push on their phone via an app or via text message to say, hey, an alert was found or something that needs your attention. Press this button to take this action, or reply with this word to take this action. So you can still have a human in the loop while still significantly reducing the work burden on especially like your tier 1 or tier 2 analysts who are handling this either in a SOC capacity or in a vulnerability management capacity. So obviously automating everything is not necessarily the right answer, and it can be done, but with great power comes great responsibility.
I think it's a nuanced sort of answer, because when you're talking about everything running in runtime and your answer is patching and blocking and stuff like that, it gets very tricky because you don't know what the impact is. But with the advent of the public cloud and more people standing up infrastructure and doing things programmatically, I think when we get to that point and when you're talking about those sort of things and people are programmatically writing how they want this infrastructure to get deployed, I think absolutely you could start automating security and ensuring that things aren't going to be introducing risk in your environment before it gets there. So like, for example, you could script something very easily in AWS to spin up a whole bunch of S3 buckets and do all this sort of stuff. You absolutely can validate that is within your policy, that they're not open to the internet, all of this stuff, and block that before it is in production. So you're not impacting things that are running. You're just you're not allowing bad things to happen to begin with. So it's nuanced. Like, it just depends on what you're referring to. More modern technologies, automation is more possible. Old school stuff, it's a little bit harder to Dan's point.
I just want to add, Daniel and Glenn are spot on. So we do have a certain level. We have a hybrid approach to this, to having automation and having the human interaction, because you sometimes with automation you get a lot of false positive. So you need to be sure before you take certain action that the example that Daniel provided is really the kind of scary stuff you don't want to happen into your organization, you want to make sure that you are careful, as Glenn says, into applying those remediation, automatic remediation to the kind of stuff, to a response to like a machine intelligence type situation. So yes, we do have automation in our agency, but we also do have a team that actually monitors a lot of those alerts as they come in.
All right, well, thank you guys so much. It's 2:30, so we just hit our time. I want to thank all of our panelists and also our attendees at home for sending in such great questions. And I feel like we've had a really excellent conversation today. That being said, I also want to thank our sponsors for this event one more time, Tenable, and we hope to see you all again at our next ATARC event on Thursday, March 10th. So before logging out, please go ahead and respond to the final CPE credit question of whether you would like to have your CPE emailed to you or not, and go register for March 10th on modernizing authentication through the use of identity management. So thanks everyone. Hope to do this again sometime soon. Bye.
Are we supposed to leave?
Yeah, I think we can bail.
All right. See you guys. Great job.
Thanks.
Likewise, take care, everyone.
Yep, you
I
too.
thank you guys.